Say, kids, what time is it?
The future is coming on, it's coming on, it's coming on, it's coming on, it's coming on.
And you're coming on right into here and now with Dr. and Mrs. Future, a.k.a. Alan Lundell and son Lundell.
Yeah.
Actually,
hi,
my
everybody.
wife. Yes.
In reality.
And Bobby Wilder. Not just our science correspondent, but our dear friend and colleague in exploring the edge of the future.
And our go-to guy when we want to know about brain enhancement and nutritional chemistry and different ways to extend the health of our lives.
Yes. Welcome, Bobby.
Thank you. Wow, that's great. It's always great to be with both of you, anytime, anywhere.
We do have fun, don't we, huh?
Yes, we do.
I remember you came in during the COVID crisis and have been with us ever since.
Yeah, a friend of mine said, there's something weird going on in China and we're going to get this thing. And so I was listening to on the radio and I said, these guys, I know Al, I got to tell them there's something strange coming down our way.
Yeah. Yeah, something strange called being on the air.
Yes.
Well, actually, I guess we're not really on the air anymore, or as some like to say.
We're on the airwaves.
In the air.
In the air.
Dave Michaels likes to use that term.
And also, we're in the new time frequency because we're live, but we're recording for the future. And thus, when you're hearing this, it's actually time travel to the past. Right? It's one of those mysterious things about time.
All time is our domain. And we're going to have even more fun today because we're actually doing a lot of video on this show, even though you folks who are listening are probably hearing it on the radio or the internet, most likely on your phone. So today's a special show because we are actually speaking to two longevity experts, Dr. Stephen Sideroff and Dr. Robert Lufkin, who did a conference on longevity last year and brought together the top people in the field. I'm not going to go into the details right now, but we will in about half an hour or so. This is our half hour to talk about other news on Dr. Future before we get into our guests. Longevity is our main focus for the show, and that will begin at around 1:30 today.
Okay.
I'm really excited about it.
So stay tuned.
Yeah.
But meanwhile, let's do the Dr. Future slate.
Yes, we got some news.
Articles.
We got some future news. We just have to get out there.
Future news now.
The top of the news is that there was a spacecraft that was on the far side of the moon, a Chinese spacecraft, and it just took off Tuesday morning and is heading back to Earth with a bunch of rocks.
Oh boy, thank you, China.
Yeah, the Chang'e
Humanity
6
is
probe.
mastering the moon once again, and this time it's China.
Yeah.
It's a testimonial to how much just a couple of generations can do when you befriend people instead of making them your enemies. And then if you can just not get jealous when you're actually successful at bringing them to their full potential.
As long as we get to play with their rocks.
Yeah.
Bring back, I think, a couple of kilograms of rocks.
Yes. Well, I think with the Asian personality, it's all about being kind and polite and what's that magic word they say? Saving face. And if you make them look bad, they're going to make you look bad. But if you make them look good, they're going to make you look good. It's instant reciprocity.
Yes. Okay. Well, I think our NASA folks are probably pretty good at some of those things, probably more than the politics.
Could be.
Politicos, and especially the scientists. They all like each other because they're all into the same stuff, like understanding the regolith of the moon. What's going on there? Is that a part of the Earth at one time or not?
The regolith, that's like the dead soil of the moon. That's what the regolith
the surface
is.
Material.
Yeah. It's the moon dust.
Well, from which moon dust arises, yes. Anyway, the Chang'e 6 probe. Chang'e 6 was launched last month. It landed on the far side of the moon, then it lifted off Tuesday morning, as I said earlier. It took 6 minutes for the engine to burn to get it into an orbit around the moon. And that's where it's rendezvousing with another ship, which is going to take it home to Earth.
And is it a Chinese ship?
Of course.
Of course. So leave it to the Chinese. It's going to be all China all the time. Whereas the United States, our moon signature was, let's do this as a whole Earth civilization. It's one step for man and a giant leap for all mankind. And
Well,
now we
we-
want to include all humans.
Well, of course, you understand America has been more of a melting pot, so naturally we have a more of an open attitude towards incorporating lots of different nation states.
We do.
That's normal. That's
We
normal.
do.
It's not
And
so
we are
normal.
also the youngest of all
There.
of the international cultures.
Yeah, and makes it more naive and interesting.
Yeah. And in some ways less baggage, more of a teenager, more belligerent, but
So,
actually less wise.
Yeah, I think the next step is maybe we need Jim Ruff in on this. We need to get the Chinese to give us some rocks.
Well,
A win-win.
a win-win.
Yeah,
That's
win-win.
right.
Are we sharing our rocks with their rocks?
That's a
yeah.
good question.
No,
That's a good
our
question.
rocks were part of international diplomacy when we first brought them back. And I forget, there was something like, 12 kilograms of rocks that were brought back from the previous moon missions. And half of them have been distributed to different countries for their museums and for their research.
Now, these rocks are particularly exciting because they're from the South Pole. The Aitken region, which is an impact crater 4 billion years old. It's about the time life began on Earth here. It's big. It's a big, big crater. It's like 1,500 miles across.
That's a country. That's half the size of our country.
It's the oldest, largest crater on the moon. It's been known for a while. It's one of the first things we saw through telescopes. And now we get some rocks from it.
It's very appropriate that the oldest culture on our planet, or one of them, is going to the oldest zone on the moon, the oldest impact zone.
Yeah, very interesting. But you remember that was For All Mankind, the series on Apple TV? They delve into this. It's an alternative history of NASA where we continued to explore the solar system. Didn't stop after Apollo like we did in this timeline. It's kind of exciting because the South Pole became the place where we first created a civilization.
Right. Because we were able to find water there, which
Yeah.
gave us the ability to mine fuels like hydrogen and oxygen.
Yeah.
And, of course, just exist with all the things we needed water for.
Yes, and of course there's the mythology then of Arthur C. Clarke in 2001, A Space Odyssey, where we not only were we had a base on the moon, but we discovered other life on the moon. They had a signal.
Right. Those ancestors who intervened in our evolution all those millions of years ago.
Intervened and or created it.
Yes, right. Tilted our evolution in the direction we are now walking.
Yeah, after all, our species is a little weird compared to the rest of this planet.
So it would appear.
Yeah.
A little more manufactured, a little less in sync with the other life on Earth.
What's going on here? Obviously connected and yet separate.
Yes, well, that's how hybrids are.
Yes, that's what you do.
They get something from all of their parents.
Thank God for the oneness.
Oneness.
Or should I say goddess?
Well,
Anyway, let's get back to the
There's
story,
only
shall
one
we?
oneness, but
Yeah, there's
we're
only
both
one
part of it.
That's true. How can I be that? How can you be one and many at the same time?
It's one of those complicated things about duality.
Yeah.
It had one parent.
Oh. Anyway, let's a couple more stories before our guests, okay?
Yeah.
There was a Japanese billionaire that was supposed to go on SpaceX's flight around the moon. He's going to take a flight around the moon. It was supposed to be this year, 2024.
Oh, right. This was the year that
This was the
Elon
year
Musk
that
was hoping
SpaceX
to
was supposed to do that.
circle the moon with some passengers.
Yeah.
Yeah. COVID set that
Well,
one back a bit.
yeah, they set up these plans back in 2018. COVID happened, of course. And then SpaceX got deals with NASA for launching to the ISS our astronauts. And that's really great. So to change their focus a little bit, that and Starlink and launching thousands of satellites has kept SpaceX very busy, and having little tourist flights around the moon just didn't seem the best model for making money and being successful
Sure.
as a corporation in America.
Well, we're all trying to balance
Yeah.
multiple priorities, right?
Yeah. So what turned out to be more successful was the Starlink communications, naturally, because we all use communication. Landing on the moon, well, how important are moon rocks to you right now?
Well, I think moon rocks are very important to people, to astrophysicists
Oh,
and
yeah, exactly.
astrobiologists.
But not like communications where everybody has a communicator in their pocket.
That's
now.
true. Everybody with a cell phone cares
Yeah.
about communications. Most of them probably don't care about moon rocks.
Yes, I said, and do I care about the ability to going to any country on the planet with my phone and just opening it up and doing my thing without being bothered by having to sign up for different companies constantly, depending on where I am. I'm very happy about that.
That's true. We like it when our machines are efficient and make our lives easier instead of harder.
Yeah, much happier.
Sure.
I think what happened was Yusaku Maezawa, he was a billionaire.
That's the Japanese billionaire who was going to go up with Elon.
Yes.
Yeah, and he got all these artists and designers and regular people, but top in their field, to go on this flight. In the meantime, I think back then he had $3 billion.
Right.
And now his net worth is about half that.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, that's
the craziness of international currency valuation, right? I guess the reserve currency value of the Japanese yen has changed since
that's
then.
important, Bobby. That's true. That has worth half the much. I think also he managed to scratch his itch by getting a trip to the ISS as well.
Oh, yeah.
Did.
He went with the Soyuz, right?
Yeah, he took a Soyuz flight early on.
See, when you're an independent citizen of the planet, you can use any of the vendors that are going to space. Welcome to the brave new world.
Yeah.
I don't think Soyuz is viable right now.
They had their last viable mission a year or so ago.
The head guy, he's not there anymore because of the war. It is.
Oh, really? We lost him because of the war?
Space tourism is not as big a field as they thought, at least at this point in time.
Well, in 2004, it was a pretty big idea. And they probably thought that they'd have an airplane that would fly pretty soon. And it took 20 years before. When was Elon's first simultaneous landing? Wasn't that like 2016 or something? Was it that long ago? I don't remember.
It sounds about right. Yeah, 2016. And the multiple rockets landing.
Originally, he was going to use the Soyuz rockets because he didn't have his own rocket. And then the deal fell through and they were asking for too much money or whatever. So he decided to build his own rockets that we now have today. And so it was fortunate that he didn't go through with the Soyuz connection.
Meanwhile, SpaceX's evaluation has steadily climbed. Back in 2018, it was valued at $30.5 billion. And just recently, it was valued at roughly $200 billion doing what they're doing.
Yeah.
Very interesting. I guess it'll happen sooner or later. Probably in a couple of years at this point. Looks to me like the next big test is the SpaceX's test of the Starship 4, which needs to land. It needs to actually land and not blow up or melt or dissolve in the atmosphere from friction. It needs to actually succeed. And that's hopefully going to happen with the next test mission. Sometime this month, I believe.
Okay.
Meanwhile, no quick trips around the moon for anybody. Google has put out a press release this week saying that don't believe everything they're saying about their AI. Google's AI is getting a really bad rap because people have been tricking it into saying put glue in your pizza and then you can have rocks to eat, things like that. They're saying that a lot of these are fake. They're not really what Google said to do, and people are making up stuff just to mess with you.
Well, that's not quite true. I mean, it is what Google said to do, but it was just spoofing, right? It turns out that Google had to look at comedy sites to answer some of the goofy questions people were asking.
Well, the AI has to understand humor and satire, which it wasn't getting. It thought that was real news.
It doesn't surprise me that Google doesn't understand comedy and satire because they've been all about controlling the narrative. People who are into control go away from humor. They can't take a joke. Their seriousness is how they act like they're more important. So I think the fact that Google thinks that they have to clamp down on humor is typical Google. I don't think that it's going to win the race. I think loving humanity and reflecting the really fun aspects of humanity is what's going to win the race.
Yes, from a human point of view, yes, but you want the...
And from an AI point of view,
from an
too.
AI point of view, you don't want to ignore humor. You want to hopefully understand it, but at least recognize what is humor and what isn't.
Right.
What is satire and what isn't. At least have that differentiation
Can't do
in
that by
the
cracking
algorithm.
down on
you need
it.
that in the algorithm. Well, you can, because in order to crack down on it, you have to know what it is. It's a way of defining the issue.
But I don't think
but
that
then after-
programmers know how to program something they don't understand themselves.
Well, there is the limitation of the psychology of the programmers and the people telling the programmers what to do. There is that psychology to consider in the equation, for sure. And a lot of them are not females and do not see how to play on an even play field or to have a decentralized model of organization and all these other wonderful things that are seeping into our system of living together.
Yeah, well, back to that only one oneness thing.
It's going to happen. But
full range.
But the thing is that Google is making progress in trying to reduce the fake results. I think it's pretty funny when people create weird things, make it look like it's coming from somebody else.
What progress is Google making in your view?
The whole idea of what's fake and what's real. It's a never-ending story, and we need new tools in that arsenal as media gets to the point of being able to fake everything. Voices. This week I've been creating fake voices. They're not as good as real voices yet, but they're getting darn close, and I have the control over hundreds of them. These give me, as a media creator, the ability to tell big stories with lots of people and completely make it up. And it's a wonderful freedom. It's kind of like, I guess, how a writer would feel with just a pen and paper and knowing that you can create anything you want. Only in this case, it's, cinematic movies.
Yeah. Well, I was really happy to see the AI gurus that we were listening to last night, the Curious Refuge fellow, Matt Wolf, and their third host. But as AI producers and people who really appreciate the power of the AIs, the top people in the field want the freedom to experiment. They don't want to have an outside curator forcing them to go through control grids. Yet, they also understand the potential dangers of giving too much freedom to people who are going to use it irresponsibly. So that's a really important conversation that we all have to have. And America is way more suited to have that conversation than, say, the totalitarian regimes of the world. We do understand freedom.
We're a melting pot country, so we have had more of an experience of many other points of view.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, these are the people that you were talking about. It's a really good link on how AI is changing the world, the chat with Matt Wolf from Curious Refuge, REFUGE. The names of the hosts, Caleb Warden.
Caleb, yes. Caleb and his co-host partner. She is even more humble than he is. Both of them are so beautiful as representatives of social media influencers. Shelby, that's her name. So Shelby and Caleb are the hosts of Curious Refuge. And just this week, they hosted Matt Wolf, who is definitely one of the main AI podcasters.
Yeah, he researches everything in the AI world.
Futuretools.io. Futuretools.io.
Yeah, so that's a website maintained by Matt Wolf that is definitely a huge hub in the emerging AI producers.
Yeah, we'll get into that in a future episode. It's quite interesting. I actually just got a very cool program that I've been using for transcription. You can drop any audio or video file into video to text, and you get a transcript within a minute.
Be right back.
The votes are in. Chef Ben here from Back 9 Grill and Bar at the Easy Off Past Tempo exit. We are so proud of our food and our service and your votes. Back 9 has been voted Santa Cruz County's best burger and best happy hour in the good times. You've heard me talking about our house ground burgers. It's time for you to come and try one so you can taste the juicy difference. And what makes our happy hour the best? You have to come and experience it yourself. See you at the 9.
Hi, folks. How many of you out there love to garden? Wouldn't it be nice to grow some of your own food? Or maybe a flower garden would brighten your day. Well, now you can have the pleasures of gardening without all that effort. You don't need a tractor. You don't need a rototiller. All you need is the Knox Garden Box, a heavily constructed, portable, elevated garden on legs that can virtually change the way you've gardened in the past. The Knox Garden Box can be set up anywhere. Yes, you can place it right on concrete. For those with bad backs, you've got critters and gophers, no space, or maybe no dirt. With the Knox Garden Box, the therapy of garden is now the prescription for good mental health. The way to find your fabulous Knox Garden Box is by logging on to knoxgardenbox.com. That's KNOX, gardenbox.com. Or by calling 831-461-9430.
Here's my story. I take 8 different prescribed drugs daily. At $5 a copay, that's about $40 a month. Now I spend just $19.95 a month and save, well, you can figure it out.
90% of all prescriptions are covered. Check for yours at monthlyfeerx.com. Never again overpay for your meds. Monthlyfeerx.com. Get all your meds for one small monthly fee, rx.com.
Okay, welcome back to the show. We are speaking with Dr. Stephen Sideroff in this half hour. Steve is an old friend, actually one of my professors from McGill. Dr. Stephen Sideroff is an internationally recognized expert in resilience, optimal performance, addiction, neurofeedback, and alternative approaches to stress and mental health. He's an associate professor in the Department of Psychiatry and Biobehavioral Sciences with a joint appointment in the Department of Rheumatology at UCLA's School of Medicine, as well as the director of the Raoul Wallenberg Institute of Ethics. He's recently finished a new book. He's going to tell us all about it. Welcome, Steve, to the show.
Alan,
Hey.
son, it's such a pleasure to be here with you.
It's great to see you too, Steve.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Bobby.
Yeah, we got Bobby on the line. I think you met. He's our science correspondent in San Francisco. And
Hi there, Bobby.
yeah,
Hi, Steve.
he came on board with us at COVID and has been here ever since. We've had so many interesting stories with him over the years,
Nice.
including yours. Now, we've spoken to you about your 9 Pillars of Resilience book in the past, and I'm curious how this revision is different. Or is this a rethinking of some of your ideas or a refinement? How would you describe what's going on now?
I would say that my work really is designed to help people make changes in their lives, for people to really make transformations and to be able to engage with the world in a much more adaptive manner. And I continually learn better ways of reaching people and helping support people to actually make changes in their lives, because we are all so stuck in old patterns, old habits. And so my evolution is a continuing process of finding the keys to transformation.
Okay, so transformation is the bottom line. That's where we're going. And what is transformative for someone at 40 is the same thing at 60, or what?
I like to start with 2 ideas. One idea is that we have to have a growth mindset as we approach the world, as we approach life. So many times, so many people look at one of their shortcomings or something that they feel they're not doing very well, and they'll just feel like, okay, well, this is who I am. I guess I just am not able to do this or that. With a growth mindset, anything that we see as a shortcoming is really an opportunity for an avenue of growth. Anytime we notice something that we have difficulty with, that's a signal to us to, okay, let's put some attention here. Let's put an intention here to grow along this lines. And from that same perspective, one of the key ways that I've modified my book is one of the common ways that people talk about resilience is it's the ability to bounce back, right? I'm sure you've heard that expression.
Yeah, we run into obstacles, we deal with them, and we come back to optimal health again.
Well, that would be great if we're starting out at optimal health. So yes, you can bounce back to that, but you don't want to bounce back to where you were before the stressful experience began. You don't want to go back to where you were. You want to learn a lesson from this stressful experience, from this challenge.
Yeah.
And so at the end of the challenge, you are better than where you were beforehand, so that with the next challenge, you're going to be even better equipped. And I refer to this not as bouncing back, but as bouncing forward.
That's good. Some might say spiraling up.
Spiraling up, yes.
Yes.
Sure. It's always engaging in the, actually, this is a way to challenge yourself through your day, through your life. What did I learn from that experience? How am I better now than when I first took that challenge?
Do you find that this mindset of wanting to continue to learn makes a difference in the aging process? You can continue to have that neuroplasticity as you get older?
Yeah, you always want to be challenging yourself in life to keep learning, to keep growing, because when you do that, you're sending a message. You know, we have this relatively new concept of epigenetics.
Yes, Dr. Bruce Lipton's.
Right,
work.
right. In fact, I talked with Bruce about this recently, and the whole idea with epigenetics is it's how we have an influence on our basic genetic makeup. The genetics don't change, but whether specific genes get expressed or not depends on new learning.
Yeah.
And so the more you engage in new learning, the more you create healthier and healthier basic ingredients of our physical makeup.
Yeah, I agree. The mystery, what I can see, is figuring out how to tap that power within the constraints of your own belief system. How much do you believe that you can change your genetic predispositions, for example?
Recently, I interviewed Joe Dispenza, another person who really is in the transformation space.
Yeah.
And what I love about his work is that he has actually got the data. So he has the data of biological changes with changing your thinking, changing your behavior, and changing your feelings.
Yeah.
And so with data such as his, I can go to anybody and say, look, here is evidence. This is empirical evidence of the power of thinking, the power of your feelings, the power of your actions. So I can help people really modify their belief system about what's possible. And the more we can engage in what's possible, we don't know what the limits are of that. We know we can see changes, and the sky's the limit in terms of what we can really achieve.
That's great to hear, because there's so much, I sense a sense of despondency these days in our country. Maybe it's the politics, the shift. There seems to be so much separation and anxiety. And it would be great if that can be relieved through some processes we can do within our own lives.
Definitely. One of the things I notice in the world today is a lot of people using a lot of their energy and being stressed out about things that they don't have any control over.
Yeah.
And this happens on all different levels. It can happen, you could be frustrated and angry with a friend of yours because they're not responding in a way that you would like. And then you can waste a lot of your energy being frustrated rather than going into a place of acceptance. This is who that person is. I'm not going to change them. I need to just be accepting of their behavior. It doesn't mean I like it, but whatever there's going on in your life that you can't change, you want to find a place of acceptance. So you're not using up your limited resources going down paths that have a dead end.
Yeah. No, we don't want that. No, I want to keep going.
Steve, do you think that in the era that we're living through now, people are in need of more psychological counseling? Do you feel like maybe something has shifted so that people don't have the resources just at their fingertips through friends and through normal access that we've relied on in the past, and that we're living in a more complicated world, so we need a more studied approach to handling it?
Well, I know that with the onset of COVID, that therapists got busier and busier. So there's evidence of that, and there's evidence of computerized therapy and online therapy growing, partly because of the growing need, as you're just suggesting. And life feels more dangerous. It feels more uncertain, and life seems more conflictual. These are all triggers for our stress response. And in my experience, the more stress we experience, the more our coping abilities begin to break down. So, yes, there is a greater need for coaching, support, a direction in people's lives because our lives are so much more complicated. In one of the talks I gave recently, I was asking people, where's their stress coming from? And the biggest response was that it's not any one thing that's so terrible. It's that there's so much on my plate. There's too much to be done. It's like there's pressure to do so many different things, and life is speeding up. All of the different developments, scientific developments, are all kind of speeding up how life is experienced. All of these things are sources of stress, and we don't really learn healthy ways of dealing with stress when we're growing up. In fact, we learn much the wrong messages because we're learning just from our little family, our primary caregivers. And if they didn't figure it all out, then they're going to teach us the same way that they do it. Not that they're going to consciously teach us, but even just modeling their behavior, we're going to make the same mistakes.
Do you have some thoughts on this topic that I think is emerging called fragility? And are you seeing that that is something that is more prevalent, and does it fit into your understanding and application of your resilience model?
Was that word fragility that you just said?
Yes.
Well, it goes along with more and more stress. People become, as I just said, people's ability to cope starts to break down with more and more stress. So you can refer to that as being more fragile. And we see this in terms of health, and we see this in terms of a lot of different ways that it plays itself out. There's a chronic illness is growing in our society. For the first time in recorded history, our age span has decreased, first time in history. So we're seeing the effects of stress all around us, and fragility is sort of like the step that occurs in the process of breakdown. So, yes, and this is why I've created my book and my model, because it's a time where becoming more resilient is an absolute must for everybody.
Should we go over quickly the 9 steps just so that those who are new to this have an idea of what we're talking about?
Yeah, with some nice examples that will inspire people and maybe help them apply it to their own life a little.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So
this is something you've thought about for a long time and have really distilled a lot of your understandings to these 9 steps.
Right. If we think about all we have to deal with to improve our health, it can feel overwhelming. So I've distilled everything down to these 9 pillars. The first 3 have to do with relationship, and the first pillar has to do with the most important relationship we have, which is our relationship with ourselves.
Start with ourselves. That's
right.
That's what all the gurus say too. Yeah.
Right. So your audience can reflect, for example, on if they make a mistake, how they treat themselves when they make a mistake. A lot of people will beat themselves up for the mistake. A lot of people will be hard on themselves, critical, judgmental, put themselves down. And what I say in my book is most of us have this sort of negative relationship with ourselves where we talk to ourselves and treat ourselves in that way.
Sure. And then that kind of forms the way that we expect the world to treat us, right? Because nobody's going to treat me better than I treat myself.
Exactly. And so the first piece of advice for people is you want to start developing, creating a healthy internal voice. And a healthy internal voice, the characteristics of a healthy internal voice is coming from a place of love, compassion. So, for example, if you make a mistake, and usually if we make a mistake, there's a cost to the mistake, right?
You usually have to apologize or
get
pay
defensive
something.
and defend yourself.
You make a mistake and the cost could be financial, the cost can be relational, but there's a cost to it.
And we tend to avoid costs typically, but yeah.
So why beat yourself up? You're already experiencing a cost as a result of that mistake. So my advice to everybody is that when you make a mistake, the way you want to treat yourself is with compassion.
To be easy on yourself. Don't swear at yourself or stuff like that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And then the next thing you want to do in terms of recovering from a mistake is, if there's a cost to that mistake, what's the lesson to be learned? What can I learn from this experience so that I'm less likely to make this mistake the next time?
So it doesn't happen again.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So this is a healthy relationship with yourself, coming from that place of love, compassion, acceptance. This is another key to how to be in relationship with yourself.
You accept your mistakes.
Most of us, if you think about being on this path in life, we're someplace on that path. But most of us feel we should be further along that path. I should have done better. I should have done it this way. I shouldn't have made that mistake. And our whole language is about not being okay with where we're at.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I wasn't able to deliver. I wasn't able to.
Right.
Alan has something he likes to say, I think, which is trust the perfection as, a way of relating to everything. The greatness, the lack of it, the mistakes, the full range is just allowing yourself to get off the hook from needing it all to rest on your shoulders.
Yeah, exactly. So what I say is, if you're in point A and you feel you should be at point B, I will say that if you say to yourself, I should be at point B, essentially you're saying there's something wrong with me where I'm at because I should be further along. So when you say that, you're actually undermining yourself. The key is to be accepting of where you're at, because if you want to get from A to B, the fastest way to get there is by accepting your starting point. Here's where I'm starting. I may not like that I'm starting here, but here's where I'm at. I can't find my keys because I'm so distracted that when I put them down, I'm not paying attention. That's why I can't find them when I'm looking for them. Okay, let me accept that about myself, about how I get distracted. The first step is that acceptance. So the first pillar is your relationship with yourself.
Yeah, I can see that after you take the step of reflecting on your own behavior, and then not judging yourself for what you did.
Right. So it's having an honest relationship with yourself, but also an accepting and loving relationship with yourself.
Yeah, self-love, that big topic in and of itself.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of self-loathing going on, and
I know. And the public discourse doesn't help either.
Yeah.
Because we see such derogatory language used by our leaders that it sort of makes it okay to do, rather than how we need to be feeling is like that's sending us all in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
Sure. Well, we call these echo chambers, right? And people tend to go towards the echo chambers that are most close to their own internal voice, right? Because then they are getting some kind of validation that allows them to go further in that direction. So how does your resilience model deal with that? Where if the need is really to develop a healthier voice within yourself, and yet you are going into social situations that are actually amplifying the negativity, how would we handle something like that?
Well, first off, it has to do with mindset. This is actually my fifth pillar of resilience, mental balance and mastery. And it's based on having a positive approach to life and a positive approach to yourself. So, when you wake up in the morning, do you think about what can go wrong, or do you think about what can go right? Okay. And in my book and in my model, I'm teaching people to focus on what can go right. I'm teaching people to start the day with the intention of having positive, good things happen in the day. So if that's your mindset, and you walk into a room or you turn on any kind of station in which it's very conflictual, in which people are bad-mouthing each other, it's your responsibility to turn off that station. It's your responsibility not to stay there and be bombarded by negativity.
Yeah, that makes sense if you have some control of the environment. But a lot of folks have to go to conferences where people have a different mentality. Like sometimes I've been to events where I feel like I'm a comic at a cynics gathering.
Right.
And the predominant belief systems out there are still into blame and justification. And
really, a lot of the social fabric is people taking a little bit of pleasure in insulting their common enemy.
Yeah. So you got to hold on to your belief system when you're in these environments. I guess that's the lesson, eh? You to be able to hold on to this.
It creates a cringe response in me when I'm around that. And it's become so prevalent. It's almost like the way that people are defining their relationships now.
It's interesting. When I was having a conversation with Bruce Lipton, we were talking about the power of the environment to shape your biology. That influences your biology.
Yeah.
And so you want to be very careful about the environments in which you put yourself. Now, as Alan was saying, what if you don't have a choice? For example, the other day I did a workshop for executives in a corporation. And if you're in a work environment, you can't choose who you're working with, and you can't choose your boss either. And so in those situations, you have to come up with some kind of, I like to say, imagery. So I tell people, imagine this giant glass bell. And imagine that you place this giant glass bell over the person that's kind of toxic, the person who's bad-mouthing, the person who's got nothing but negative. And I want you to imagine that all the words coming out of his mouth have a color to it. And so that as he's talking and the words are coming out with this color, they hit this glass bell and they bounce back to him or her. And so people find that very effective because they have an imagery that actually helps them stop those words and those messages from being absorbed. And it gives them a sense of protection in those dangerous environments. And that's something that we all need, is to feel like we can protect ourselves in those toxic environments.
Yes, a toxicity shield of some sort.
So would that be the meaning, if I understand it, of something like instant karma? The idea that people's words reflect back on themselves and it somehow doesn't harm you, so you're shielded from it.
Yeah, I like to say that I'm in partnership with the universe. That's my approach.
Yeah,
so
beautiful.
It's standing with you then.
And so if you've heard on charity events where they say we have this $1,000 matching challenge, right? You give us 1,000 and we have this other 1,000 to match it.
Right. Yeah,
so I approach the life and the world that way. I'm going to put out positive energy because I'm partnering with the universe. And if I put out positive energy, that's what's going to come back to me. And it's been my experience that that's what happens. And so I'm not going to want to put out negative energy because the universe will give me negative energy back. So I take that responsibility and expand upon it. And I find that it's a very effective way for me to stay positive.
Great. So you're the author of your own positive experience, and the world is the echo chamber.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. So and you have a few years behind you in making this happen now too, eh?
Yeah, it seems to be working okay.
Yeah. Oh, good.
And the beauty is that people who I've worked with report to me that they find it's true as well. So I'm going to keep on this track.
Do you think there's a critical mass once a certain number of people reach this kind of awareness that the culture will shift?
I think there is. I don't know what it is, where it is, or where we're at with it, but I would agree with you.
Well, Steve, you always inspire me so much. You're just an icon of everything that you're teaching, and your resilience definitely inspires me. And
well, thank you. I appreciate it. And today's a great day. Today is the day my book got published.
That's right. There's the 4th.
Congratulations.
Today's the day. So people can go right out and get it from Barnes & Noble, Amazon, or any place where you buy books.
Great. And you look up Steve Sideroff and the 9 Pillars of Resilience. And you can also find a link on our archive page, which is drfutureshow.com, today's links page. And of course, when we post the show.
And Steve, we're going to keep you on. We're going to have Dr. Lufkin speak for the next half hour, and then the both of you together to talk about your longevity conference and your takeaways from that.
Sounds good.
Feel free to stay on the line, but we'll mostly be talking to Dr. Lufkin for the next. Okay.
Sure.
All right. Thanks so much. I'm so glad you're here. Okay, welcome back to the show. This half hour, we're speaking with Robert Lufkin, MD, a physician medical school professor at UCLA and USC, and he's really focused on the applied science of health, longevity, and consciousness. He's been through an ordeal himself with chronic disease and transforming his life into a new Robert, I guess you might say. He's going to give us the latest and the greatest from his world in his new book, Lies I Taught in Medical School, which is a bit of a clickbait, don't you think, Robert? But still, I mean, it shows you how the system maybe is evolving. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Alan. Son, I have to say I'm a fan of your program. I've listened to it, and it's an honor to be on it today. So thank you.
Thank
you for your kindness in having me.
Yeah, and it's great that we've got to know you from other events. In the past.
Yes.
That's right. Peers on the frontier.
That's right.
Back on the playa and other things.
Right, back on the playa. Science meets shamanism.
Yes. A lot of good happens there.
Indeed. So tell us about what you've been up to lately. You teach in medical school. Now that is interesting because you have been through a life change where you've kind of left traditional medicine to embrace an alternative. Can you tell us about how that transformation happened?
Yes, you're a traditional MD who's going into the world of non-traditional solutions. So
WTF.
Very interesting to a lot of people we know.
Yeah, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm actually the ultimate quintessential medical insider. I spent my whole career as a medical school professor, teaching, practicing medicine, writing papers, taking money from drug companies to do research and all that sort of thing. And I was dragged screaming and kicking into this I'd like to say I wanted to make the world a better place, but it was really out of self-interest when I came down with 4 chronic diseases that forced me to kind of question what I've been taught and what I've been teaching and what my colleagues are still teaching, sadly, in many places.
I see. So the disease came in not just as one, but as a committee.
That's right.
Well, and I think that what's really refreshing is that we're in an era where the medical profession is updating their beliefs and what they're sharing with people because we have so much more information now. And research does move us forward. We're not where we were in the 50s. We're not where we were in the 80s. We've got new tools at our disposal. And I'm sure you've been keeping up to date with that.
Yeah, and I want to go on record. The book is critical of Western medicine and it throws a lot of stones, but I'd like to go on record in saying that I still believe in Western medicine. It had a revolutionary impact in all our lives in the 20th century through public health measures, infectious disease. It's transformed globally the way we live. And even today, if I step outside and get hit by a bus, I'm probably going to want to get those life-saving measures that Western medicine can provide.
Yeah,
a blood
you're not going to go Ayurvedic and herbal for your broken bones.
Well, lifestyle will certainly help me heal better, but in the acute life-saving event, if I need my spleen removed and I need my bones set, there's certain things that Western medicine does better than anything else that we know of.
Yes.
The problem is in the 21st century, we're facing a new set of diseases that were present before, but now they've reached epidemic proportions.
Now you're talking about the chronic disease. The ones you faced were pretty much evident in our society.
They're the number one killers in Western society, right?
And I think that's really instructive because you've got separate treatments for each of these diseases, but in actual fact, you've identified a root cause. Would you say that's...
Yeah, exactly. The problem is, and this is the failure of Western medicine today, I think, is that these chronic diseases, which take up 80% of the resources and that we're seeing really an epidemic proportion of them, things like obesity and overweight. Most adults are overweight or hypertension. Half of adults have hypertension, and it goes on and on. Cardiovascular disease, stroke, heart attack, cancer, Alzheimer's disease, and mental illness. These are all reaching epidemic proportions. And Western medicine is applying the things that were so successful in the 20th century, things like pills and surgery to treat these. And it's obviously not working in many cases.
Well, isn't it because you only have so much time to treat someone and there's really not enough personal health care to go around? So we have to make it simple, like a pill?
Yeah, I think we all the patients ask for pills. I mean, I would rather have a pill than get a lecture about lifestyle and how I need to change what I eat and how I exercise. But the sad truth is that the pills that are given and the pills that I was prescribed a medicine for each one of those 4 diseases.
Like high blood pressure.
High blood pressure and gout and prediabetes. Each of those pills, while they may be life-saving in the moment and prevent me from dying acutely, and also lowering the symptoms, the sad part is that they don't do anything to treat the underlying cause. And these diseases go on and continue and continue and continue. The number one cause of death that you, me, and all our listeners are likely to die of statistically is a heart attack. And the current treatment for heart attacks is when the blood vessel is narrow to the heart, which causes the heart attack, a mechanical stent is put in to open up the blood vessel. And that's standard treatment now. And I've had friends who
works for a week, right? It works for a little while.
They get a stent and they go, wow, Western medicine saved my life. I dodged that bullet. What they don't realize is the stent, maybe it saved their life acutely, but it doesn't change their long-term survival. And in fact, the underlying disease, the so-called atherosclerosis, or narrowing the blood vessels, continues to go on through all the other arteries of the body and even in the stent itself. And that's emblematic of all these chronic diseases. In other words, the pills and surgery, in most cases, don't actually treat the underlying cause. And the fascinating thing, the wake-up call for me was the treatment for these underlying causes. It's the same thing. It's the same type of treatment. If that treats one thing, will also treat and reverse the other thing. And it's lifestyle, specific things that I, as a patient, can choose to do with my life that will, reverse obesity, hypertension, diabetes, all these things in that list.
Does that mean that taking a pill won't work?
Well,
it depends.
Take a lot of pills.
Is that just a piece of it now? It used to be the only solution. Now it's just one
lifestyle.
of 10.
Well, I thought, okay, lifestyle, but how did you determine that? I mean, did it take much detective work to figure out these underlying causes?
Well, what happened to me, as I talk about in the book, is I was diagnosed with 4 diseases. I went to my doctor and they gave me 4 pills for them, different pills for each one. And they said, lifestyle doesn't really work. You're going to be on these pills for the rest of your life. Get used to it.
So they didn't believe in lifestyle. They didn't see that as key as you do today.
Exactly. And out of self-interest, I began looking at the literature and studying and looking at controlled papers. I didn't invent this. I didn't discover this. It's out there. But I wasn't aware of it, and many of my colleagues were not aware of it.
You were researching it for yourself and sharing it with your colleagues.
Exactly. And through the knowledge of this, that these basic lifestyle tools, which I didn't think would work either, I was able to literally reverse these 4 chronic diseases to the point the doctors couldn't believe it. They thought the lab was broken or something because my labs returned to normal. And I was something that they weren't used to. They deprescribed the medicines for me. In other words, they told me to get off the medicines. And anytime we talk about stop taking pills or anything, any of this should only be done with I'm not advocating anyone stop their pills or their medicine without the cooperation of your healthcare provider. They need to be involved because otherwise it can be dangerous.
Yeah, provide them with...
Well, you do need an alternative treatment. And that treatment is now what we're looking at.
Absolutely. Yeah. And this treatment does something that the pills and surgery can't do, and it reverses the basic underlying cause that can actually wind these diseases back. Type 2 diabetes, The majority of people, not all, but the majority of people can reverse their type 2 diabetes to the point where they stop taking insulin and metformin and other drugs with lifestyle changes, primarily nutrition in that point. It's really remarkable.
Diet and exercise, still core, right?
Well, yeah, diet and exercise are foundational, but also sleep is critical. Sleep, not only quality and quantity, famous study, they took healthy college students and they sleep deprived them, and within 48 hours they became diabetic. So it messed up their metabolism and their metabolic state. Wow. And of course, the 4th pillar is stress, which Steve will agree with me on this, that stress mindset is also key. And the thing that I learned about lifestyle is nutrition is right up there, but you have to sort of fix all of them. In other words, if I fix my nutrition, my sleep, my exercise, but if I don't fix my stress, I can still have problems. So any one of those pillars, you really need to address everything at once.
Yes, yes, yeah. And you also had discovered rapamycin, I believe, that had a key element in the aging process or longevity.
Yeah, that seems to be a darling in the emerging world of avoiding long-term disease.
Yeah, and the combination of that with, was it metformin? Metformin and rapamycin seemed to be a nice thing to consider as well in your research and longevity.
Yeah, I think our audience would be very interested in hearing you talk about the way that the rapamycin works for people who are trying to combat their diseases.
But I agree with you too, that it's foundational is your health, working with your diet. One of your big points that I got from your work was junk food, stuff in bright colored packages are not good for you. Cut down on carbs, cut down on sugar. And we're off to a good start here.
Are you worrying?
Absolutely.
I'm asking too nerdy of a question.
Yes. Well, I try to start carbs and sugar.
No, I didn't start out to write a longevity book, but the penultimate chapter in the book is on longevity. And I was sort of forced into it because I became aware when you take these chronic diseases that we talk about today and that are discussed in the book, these are the diseases that statistically determine our longevity. So if we slow down or reverse these chronic diseases, an interesting thing happens. We start living longer. And the same metabolic processes that reverse these diseases also increase our longevity. And there's a metabolic switch that we talk about in the book that rapamycin is a drug that affects it called mTOR. And diet and lifestyle affect mTOR, and rapamycin does too. But to give you the profound, wide-reaching effects of mTOR and rapamycin, it's the most powerful anti-aging pharmaceutical that's ever been discovered yet. And when you put rapamycin cream on the hands of people, the wrinkles decrease and tend to go away. If you put rapamycin in your hair, the gray hair tends to go away, the hair grows back.
Wow.
If you put rapamycin in the stent in the coronary arteries, the blood vessels don't clog off anymore. It slows down menopause. Rapamycin, in the animal model at least, delays menopause, fertility. It increases hearing, avoids age-relating hearing loss. And even the diseases that we die of, like I said, the stents in the coronary arteries.
Yes.
Also in cancer, rapamycin is FDA approved for adjunctive cancer treatment for 8 different cancers. And even for Alzheimer's disease, rapamycin is now being studied in human trials around the world with that. So rapamycin is an amazing, amazing drug. But to your point, Alan, I want to emphasize that it's a pill, and we don't really understand totally anything about longevity or how rapamycin works. Is it just mTOR, or is it AMP kinase? Is it the sirtuins or other pathways? And the point is that we're still being surprised with rapamycin. There are many things we don't know, but lifestyle we do know does the same effect as rapamycin, or even synergistic effects. So I would never, I take rapamycin, but I would never take rapamycin without first getting your longevity house in order.
Sure.
In other words, your lifestyle.
Yeah.
And then you can get the benefits of everything. But taking it as a pill itself, I think you're missing out on things, and you may not even get the benefits.
I know what you mean. I think it's kind of like taking Ozempic,
Yeah, I was going to say that seems to be the natural part of this conversation is people who are trying to get there through Ozempic, which is a pill to control their obesity.
Yeah, I like my lifestyle. Just give me a pill. Yeah.
It's a new addiction as opposed to something that restores your body's vitality. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And side effects associated with it. Right now, rapamycin has relatively few side effects, but we don't know. Lifestyle does have side effects. The metabolic approach I do that I talk about in the book, the diet, the side effects are 6-pack abs, and weight loss and getting rid of brain fog and fitness and vitality and a joy of life. All these things are the side effects of the lifestyle, but nothing really negative so far.
Wow. And it took finding out that you had to combat disease to really get you to try this new approach, huh?
Yeah, I mean, so many of my colleagues who have had a similar journey are sort of forced into it by a personal experience that draws them into it. And it's too bad it has to be that way. But as more and more people, this happens to them, hopefully the message will get out so that this doesn't have to be the way for everyone to find out about it.
I guess it's the silver lining of adversity.
Now, did you find that you were going along in life and you were feeling fine and you were thinking that you were living a pretty healthy, normal life, and then you found out all of a sudden you had these diseases and then something changed? How would you tell that story?
Was it a sudden epiphany? Were you at Burning Man? Or
well, let's see. That year I wasn't, because I had my kids. And so the 4 diseases came on almost the same time. And as I began studying them and researching them, it became clear that there are some alternatives that I figured, what the heck, I've got nothing to lose, right? And so I tried them and things began happening. I began feeling better. My lab markers improved and it was working. And the more I read about it, the more encouraged I got. And the more I did it, the more successful it was. And eventually that's how I went down that path.
No. How open have been your colleagues in your insights into this? You teach at medical school. Do you see introducing these ideas into the curriculum?
Yeah, some of the ideas, well, many of the ideas in the book are going against what is modern medical orthodoxy, and people still teach a calorie is just a calorie. You know, if you want to lose weight, just exercise more and eat less. Well, we've all seen how well that works, and that's one of the lies I talk about in the book. But the reception to me has been gracious and open from most of my colleagues. You know, I think intelligent people can, or reasonable people can agree to disagree about things. And I hope that I'm open-minded enough that I stay open to views that disagree with mine, and I look at them. I try to read the peer-reviewed literature and the original citations, and I just ask my colleagues to do the same. And sometimes it's even reading an article and we interpret it differently, but the reception has been good.
Good. I'm glad to hear it. A couple of things I'd like to mention before we bring Steve on with you. You made some good points, I thought, regarding the whole diet area of junk food and seed oils. Could you briefly tell our audience a little bit about your insights in junk food and seed oils?
First of all, full disclosure, I'm a recovering junk food addict, so I know what it's like. Junk food, I can't keep them in the house. I've got a teenage daughter and a younger daughter, and they bring it home, so I have to be very careful. But if you want to do one thing to improve your metabolic health, that is avoid junk food. And the problem is most food in our stores and all food in a 7-Eleven is junk food by definition. By junk food, I mean highly processed, contains a lot of carbohydrates, grains, cereals,
Lots of
seed
ingredients.
oils.
Lots of ingredients.
And lots of ingredients, colors, packaging, advertising. These junk foods drive inflammation, they drive insulin resistance, and they drive these foundational metabolic abnormalities that I believe are the root cause of all these diseases. So getting rid of junk food and
that's hard,
eating healthy food.
What about in moderation? What about just a little bit of junk food?
Yeah, that's it. People say, well, you know, you got to live. And how do you want your health? You want your health in moderation, or do you want to go full on and be absolutely healthy? You know,
popcorn at the movies? I mean, you know.
Well, you know, we all have to live. But at least we can be aware of it and be, at least many people are not aware of the damage they do when they feed their kids sugar cereals or orange juice, how harmful these things are.
Well, that's a good point. Do you think we should have medical devices that let us know how harmful they are so we have some feedback?
Sure, yeah. What you're signaling there is the continuous glucose monitors for up until now have been only available through a prescription in the United States. These are monitors that allow you to follow your glucose. You just put it on your arm and you see it on your smartphone and get feedback on the diet and how your lifestyle's working. And in England, you can buy them in any store, but that's about to change in the United States for the first time this summer. Continuous glucose monitors will be available for consumers. So anyone who wants to go in and the Walgreens or CVS or whatever, they can buy those.
Oh, that's great. Okay, so you recommend that would be a good feedback to see just how much your glucose is being affected by when you eat a candy bar, chips, or whatever.
I do. Many of my colleagues don't. Some doctors say patients should not have access to that information. They shouldn't see what their glucose is doing. But I disagree. I think the patients need to be informed, and we're all better because of it.
Okay, good point.
Right. All right. We're going to go to a Santa Cruz Voice local campaign for our sponsors, and then we'll be back and have a little round table with you and Steve.
Yeah, I want to hear about your longevity experiment there. Right. Looking forward to it. We'll see you in a couple minutes.
All right. Stay tuned, everybody.
Thanks,
We'll be right back.
It's Dr. Robert Lufkin.
Cannabis is one of nature's most beneficial plants, and at Treehouse Dispensary, we use it to build community. In addition to dispensing cannabis and education, Treehouse hosts First Friday events every month that feature our community's local artists, makers, and activists. If you're 21 plus, join us at 3651 Soquel Drive every First Friday from 5 to 8 p.m. to enjoy the work of local artists and musicians, find one-of-a-kind gifts, and learn more about the top cannabis products in California. See you soon.
Do you have a car sitting around you want to get rid of? Donate your car and help veterans and their families. Yes, one fast call to the Veteran Car Donation Program and we'll come and remove your car for free. You can donate most cars, trucks, or SUVs in most conditions. The proceeds raised goes to help active military, veterans, and their families. And you get a tax deduction. Operators are standing by. Here's the number.
800-640-9509. Again, that's 800-640-9509.
My friend Beth was spending around $70 a month. $70 on prescription drugs. She went online and saved a bunch. And with the extra money, every month, Beth buys supplies to expand her business.
90% of all prescriptions are covered. Check for yours at monthlyfeerx.com. Never again overpay for your meds. Monthlyfeerx.com. Get all your meds for one small monthlyfeerx.com.
When you need help escaping from an abusive relationship, call on the Angel.
Hello, I am Attorney Angel Hess, and I am ready to help you. Whether you or a loved one needs legal protection from an abusive spouse, cohabitant, or neighbor, I will help you. I have over 7 years' experience working as a lawyer protecting others from abusive relationships.
Stop the abuse now. Call on the Angel, Attorney Angel L. Hess at santacruzlegal.net.
Welcome back to the show. We're talking to Dr. Robert Lufkin and bringing back on Dr. Stephen Sideroff, our two esteemed doctors. One's a clinical psychologist, Stephen, and Robert is an MD. I think you were in radiology originally, Robert.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah. I'm kind of curious. You guys are both down in LA and have a number of affiliations with LA Healthcare. How did you two meet? What's a little bit about your story? Was it a conference or?
How did we meet? We've been friends a long time.
It's behind the veils of history. It's been so far.
Okay.
Really close friends for many years.
I see. So after you came to LA, I mean, you knew Hal as one of our other friends of the show.
Right.
Back in the 70s. And I guess you came to LA after your stint at McGill. And
Right. And it's been such a pleasure. Rob and I have been good, close friends for years and years. So last year, actually the last couple of years, what a joy and pleasure it was to partner with Rob and put on a longevity summit.
Yeah, that's where we're coming to with this. You guys actually put on a summit on longevity, brought together world's experts in the topic, and it actually happened.
I just have to compliment both of you because that was such a diverse and so cutting edge in covering so many subjects about how to live healthfully, live longer, from very interesting, intricate research about new therapies and mental health therapies and resilience and diet and nutrition. It was so comprehensive.
So how did it come together? How did you guys decide to do that?
Well, as part, I think we had natural synergies from our backgrounds. I'm a medical doctor. Steve is a psychologist, and the role that psychology and sort of mind-body, if you will, is really foundational on longevity. And going through that process really opened my mind up about so many things on the mind side that, that I hadn't thought of coming from more of a traditional medical approach.
More like stress and its effects on health.
Yeah, and even mindset for longevity as part of stress as well.
For me, it was such a pleasure to know that whatever I didn't know, Rob would know. I really felt like I had the psychological covered, but when it came to the medical, it was a great pairing of our expertise, because when you're talking about longevity, you have to integrate both of those pieces to really get a full complement of the issues in longevity.
Yes, the mind body. Yeah.
One of the big questions that came up at the beginning that was eye-opening for me, that made me think about this, that the different guests talked about, was the question of why work on longevity? What's the point? When I think most of us grew up, we were afraid of population overpopulation, really the population explosion, and we're worried about too many people on the earth. Well, today we know that's not true, and there's population collapse going on. China, Japan, Korea,
yeah, we're
Italy.
too successful at getting what we wish for, right?
Exactly. And so at a very basic level, with decreasing fertility and decreasing population, extending longevity, lifespan of the people who are here, at least will make up for some of that. But that in itself is probably not enough reason. And a lot of people say, hey, why do you want to live longer? I certainly don't want 10 extra years in the nursing home. And we're not talking about
you want quality
increasing
of life.
lifespan, without increasing health span. But
I think Ricky Gervais had a really funny line about how he would want to live older if he could live like at age 40 for another 30 or 40 years, but living at like age 70 or 80 for the last 10 years of your life really sucks. Like nobody's looking forward to that.
Well, I'd like to propose something even better that certainly hadn't occurred to me before this whole experience. Is a lot of people, when they think of prolonging age, they say, well, I'm at age 60, and now instead of dying in 5 years when I retire, I live another 40 years. And they go, well, I don't want, like Ricky Gervais, I don't want to live another 40 years at age 60. I want to live at 30 or 20. Well, I'm going to propose something that might even be better. Think about where each of us have gone in our own life's journey between 20 and 60, how we've grown as people, how we've matured, how we've changed in becoming a different person. So rather than looking at extending longevity as another 40 years on the golf course or watching Netflix reruns or just even hanging around with your grandkids, how about if we take those 40 years and we suddenly become new people? We transform ourselves into the people that we've never seen before. In other words, take that amplification from 20 to 60 and put it from 60 to 100, and we grow as people. We become the wise elders that we all need in the world, and we do things that were never possible. Rather than just extending things at 60 or extending things at 70, let's transform ourselves into a new life and a new generation. And for me, that is very exciting. I want to live an extra 40 years. I don't want to play golf for 40 years, or I don't want to be retired for 40 years.
Sure.
And I can see
on
why
the
many
cutting edge
people
of
do
discovery,
that.
right?
Yeah.
Do you embrace the idea that aging is a disease?
Well, I think it's semantics a little bit, because longevity is, when people die, it's not like their bodies wear out. There's a mistaken conception, I think, that aging is just wearing out of our bodies. When somebody dies of a heart attack, it's not that their body wears out or even their heart wears out. There's a specific event that happens that causes blood to stop flowing. When people die of Alzheimer's, it's not that their brain wears out. They have a active inflammatory reaction in the brain. So longevity and aging is not a result of wearing out, in my opinion, where we just kind of wind down. I think it's a result of specific diseases, and it's a short list. You can go on the internet and you can see the top 5 diseases that are going to kill us all statistically: heart disease, cancer, Alzheimer's disease, stroke. It's a short list. but the risk of those diseases increase with aging. And if we adopt some of the metabolic and stress strategies that Steve and I talk about in our books, we're able to slow down those diseases and improve longevity.
You could be healthy at 100?
Oh, sure. There are people who are healthy at 100, and that's why it's unfair to use a stereotyped image of a frail 80-year-old who can't walk. When no politics here, but we have two presidential candidates who are 80 years old, and maybe they're not a good example because neither one of them are doing very well. But
at least they're running for president. That's something.
Exactly. But look at Mick Jagger, you know, and Keith Richards. They're in their 80s, running on stages, coliseums in front of tens of thousands of people every single night.
I know, right?
Playing those same songs.
Great inspiration.
Yeah. Well, and some of the people in this room, I'd say, are great examples in this Zoom call, are great examples of defying the expectations of age. I look at all of us and I know that very few people would guess that we're as old as we are.
And I think those expectations need to change, because if people expect they're going to die at age 65, they do. The expectation, the mindset.
Yes.
Most firefighters die within 5 years of retirement, a large number. And if we expect 80-year-olds to be frail and weak, that's what we get.
Right? Yeah.
We need to rethink the whole medical psychological framework for this. I'm in the medical field in radiology. There are radiation doses that we're recommended to get throughout our lifespan that are cumulative over the life, and that's based on an age of 65. If you're going to live to 120, you need to rethink, we all need to rethink about radiation exposure. Maybe not get as many x-rays and maybe do other things. Medicine needs to look at people living to 100, not living to 60.
No, I think it comes to mind is that biology is a self-repairing mechanism, a self-repairing system. So
one of the things that I write about in an article that I published in Psychology Today, the title was Purpose, the Ultimate and Use It or Lose It.
Purpose, for sure.
And I talk about how we potentially have an influence on our genetic makeup through the epigenetic process.
It's Bruce Lipton, who you had on the...
Right. And so if you, rather than retiring and, as Rob was saying, get onto the golf course, which could be fun, but if instead you have a purpose, a reason for living, and if that purpose is actually in service, if it's designed to help our species live a better life, you're sending a message right directly through the epigenetic process to your genetic makeup saying, I have an important purpose for the species. We need to stay healthy longer. And in that article, I actually propose that if you have a purpose in life, you actually send a message to your own biology to stay healthier longer because of that purpose. We'll have to do some research to see if that actually can be proven. It's empirical, but I think it can be proven.
That biology can be directed by psychological purpose.
Yes, exactly.
And that goes back to mindset, right, Steve? That mindset is so important. I was talking to a friend, and something they were saying, this is the last time I'm probably going to go to this event. And I go, why was that? And he goes, well, I'm so many years old. And it's like that in itself becomes a self-fulfilling thing that they visualize themselves as being old. I used to talk about aging and say, Botox injections or dyeing your hair, it may make you look younger, but it doesn't change your longevity. You don't live any longer. And somebody once corrected me on that, and they brought me a large body of literature showing that people, it's correlative, it's not causal, but people who inject Botox maybe, or dye their hair, or do things to adopt a more youthful appearance actually do live longer, maybe not because of the Botox or the, Grecian formula, but because they have a mindset of youth and they see themselves as continuing on. So mindset, it blew me away with doing their conference with Steve, that for all the lifestyle factors to reprogram our epigenome, mindset is one of the most powerful ones.
Yes.
There's an interesting study that was done. They took a group of elderly people And they took him to this camp where the whole camp was designed based on the 1950s. So it was taking these people back to their childhood. The cars that were around were from the 50s. And they essentially, has to do with mindset. They essentially had these people experience themselves from 30 or 40 years before. And they looked at a lot of their biological markers. And they found that they actually reversed some of the biological markers of aging by putting them in this mindset of a younger version of themselves.
It's interesting.
So it's actually evidence that this notion of mindset and where you place your focus actually has a biological impact.
So we could have a VR time machine for each of us, take us back to our youth, and that actually would show physiological benefit.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. Well, that's
your audience can probably figure out for each of them a creative way of creating that actually has an impact.
Well, how do you create that? Okay, in the case you just stated, a group of people went to a summer camp that evoked these memories. Do you think that
Andy Griffith's show,
the same thing happens? Yeah, if you watch your old favorite TV shows or movies, or if you look through picture albums, or what are some of the techniques that are going to be most successful at restoring that sense of self?
I think it's about immersing yourself. So I can picture perhaps a phenomenal experience from 30 years ago and just immerse myself in that experience. Try and remember the smells, the tastes, the sounds. Maybe I'll use music of that era to facilitate that process. And then remember my feelings from that time and perhaps the joy I was experiencing. And if I immerse myself in that as intensely and for long enough, I think it will have that effect. And I did an interview with Joe Dispenza, who actually did some of these studies and looked at their biology and actually did find a regression in some of their biological markers. So I think Rob and I, in our interviews in our longevity summit, actually found various kinds of evidence that we have these capabilities.
Oh, that's interesting. You see, you drew from the various participants. Okay, so for the uninitiated, Joe Dispenza, what did you take away from him?
So Rob and I interviewed him for our longevity.
He wrote Becoming Supernatural, How Common People Are Doing the Uncommon. I think was his book.
When he helps people, just as I just described, helps people immerse themselves in a positive state, in a healing state, in an intentional mindset state, that their physiology begins to shift and a lot of their symptoms fall by the wayside. He had evidence about this.
So
after that interview, I hadn't had much exposure to Joe Dispenza, but I spent a week with him in Mexico doing a meditation retreat. It was with about 2,000 other people, but it was amazingly intimate and intense. It involved meditations as long as 5 hours or 6 hours or so, but it was very, very powerful. And it almost went beyond meditation. It was different than the meditation I'd experienced before, like Vipassana or anything. It was more along the lines of shamanic visions. And although there were no drugs involved, it was all through practices and all. We were visualizing DMT in our pituitary gland and kind of the natural ways to access alternate worlds and even change the future. I mean,
can we ask you this?
It's hard to.
It sounds to me like if you've had some of these transformative experiences in the past, that such an events like this might help bring them back up to the moment for your consciousness.
Absolutely. Yeah. Joe Dispenza, at least from my experience, was very powerful medicine. And I'm still kind of unpeeling the layers on that experience.
Yeah, something that I've been formulating as you guys have been talking is if you could talk about and characterize the experiential differences between, say, intention and just positive thoughts that you're telling yourself versus something that is a little more mysterious, such as meditation, and maybe compare that also with hypnosis And all of these being different techniques that might be invoked by people who are trying to go through some kind of transformation, and what works, what is available,
You got her going deep here. My goodness. Because I was just going to say that there's some crossover with Bruce Lipton's work too, and what you're talking about with Joe Dispenza.
What I loved about Joe's work, and it's outside of my expertise, Steve can maybe comment on it more, but I love the idea of our past really defining our present and our future, and through the default mode network, basically, and that his techniques were aimed at redefining the present and changing the future, and actually moving things around to make things happen in the future. It was very powerful, very mystical, but I think there's a lot of truth to it.
I'd say that all of those different approaches you mentioned, son, have a lot of things in common. And change and transformation, which is really at the heart of my book, but is really the big question. How do we really get real change? And one of the problems with creating change is that we have a whole history. Every one of us has this whole history, and that history is imprinted in our neural networks. And so now you do something new. You learn something new, which is a single experience or a brief experience. It can't compare in terms of its impact with your entire history. Mm-hmm. And that's why change is so difficult. So all the methods that you just talked about, whether it's hypnosis, whether it's meditation, whether it's biofeedback, they are all about bringing a focus to the process of change, but then creating a practice that over time begins to supplant the old learning and the old memory. You have to balance out the energy of a consistent new pattern to overtake the whole history that we have when we engage in a learning process.
Wow, yeah.
I think about it from that perspective.
Yeah, and I think you were talking about how Bruce Lipton had approached that aspect of how we create reality, that we have a part of ourselves that is just going with our programming, which consistent with the past. We're fitting into the patterns that we've already mastered, and we're just putting them out because it's easier. There's less resistance. But the actual opportunity for transformation is in accessing that untapped spirit of creativity and innovation, and that's something that is emerging new. So that those two have to play together, right?
Yeah. And whether it's Joe or myself or Rob or so many people have said, is that when you go to do something new, the unknown is uncomfortable. And this is what usually causes people to shrink back to the old pattern, is they start to do something new and different. It feels uncomfortable. And that discomfort needs to be tolerated. If you want change to occur, you have to accept and tolerate some discomfort. We refer to it as growing pains, right? Is that you step into new territory, you have to little by little adjust and adapt to that.
Did you guys do that in organizing this event? Do you experience some growing pains in bringing all these different folks together?
Definitely. Yeah. Rob and I really took it on as a challenge.
Yeah.
And we wanted to bring mind body together in that longevity arena, not just one or just the other.
Okay. In the final few minutes here, is there any other takeaways from that event that you wish to share with us? This was a part of the mind. Was there a body person there, for example, that really got your attention?
One thing that struck me is just how close mind and body were interrelated, and you really can't talk about one without the other. And our speakers reflected that. So I think it was nicely covered in our program.
Did you have any speakers that combined both well, mind and body? Or are there people still specialized?
I'd say people are, the most part, specialized, wouldn't you, Rob? The body people would mention lifestyle, but really not go into it or address it significantly, and vice versa.
Emmer Mayer was sort of the gut-brain axis, and there was sort of that kind of thing. Or Dale Bredesen talked about lifestyle and Alzheimer's and reversing Alzheimer's with these different things. But yeah, for the most part, unfortunately, there's still a lot of silos there.
Microbiome and desire.
Steve and I interviewed Elizabeth Parrish, who's and she actually had gene therapy using the Clotho gene. So she got that through a CMV vector that she had for a while. Clotho is getting a lot of interest, and the challenge with all of these is demonstrating the effectiveness. On longevity, it's really hard with humans because you can't do longevity studies, but the interventions testing program is one I go to a lot. That's run by the federal government, is paid for by tax dollars. They take mice and they basically take two groups of mice and they give them methylene blue, or they give them green tea or ashwagandha or rapamycin or metformin. Or the great thing about it, because it's a public program, we can all write in and suggest things to be given to these mice. And the mice only live 3 years.
3 years, so you get fast results. Amazing.
Yeah, so they do 660, they do NAD supplements, they do statins, they do everything. And then they see if the mice live longer or shorter with the drugs. And the one drug, at least in these studies by far, that's more than anything else is rapamycin. But there are other ones like acarbose, which is a diabetic drug, which blocks carbohydrate uptake, blocks glucose from going in. When you combine acarbose with rapamycin, you get a bigger effect than either rapamycin or acarbose by itself. So that speaks to what we talked about before, that we really don't understand what's going on with any of these, but lifestyle by limiting carbohydrates should be done. If you're even thinking about taking rapamycin or acarbose, the lifestyle thing should be in place. But there's so many things out there, so many different things to try. It's amazing.
Yeah, to see what you actually adapt or adopt into your regimen is, I guess, the question. Huh?
Do you do any testing on yourself based on your genetic background, also your microbiome genetics?
Yeah.
What you have there. So do you do any of these personally yourself?
Yeah, I do everything. I do genotyping, I do gene sequencing, microbiome studies. Steve and I both did it with Viome. We had
Son did them.
On there. The microbiome is really challenging because you get a lot of data, but it's, in my experience at least, it's tough to translate it into actionable items, even recommendations. And
It's somewhat individuated, right? Yeah.
In the microbiome, it's not saying the microbiome isn't important, even foundational as far as our mental health, but it's really remarkable. I mean, in one study, they even, after one ayahuasca experience, within 24 hours, the microbiome dramatically changed. And that was out of Hemel Patel, who's a scientist at UC San Diego who works with Joe Dispenza.
Yeah.
They did that work, and it's amazing that the microbiome can shift so suddenly from an experience we think of largely in our heads. But there's just so much we don't know about these things.
Yeah. The microbiome critters don't live very long either, do they? Can mutate quickly.
Yeah.
And they reproduce very quickly.
But it makes you think twice about taking an antibiotic, which is like a nuclear bomb on your microbiome. Yeah. Similarly, using mouthwash is like an atom bomb on your oral microbiome, which now mouthwash is associated with hypertension because of nitric oxide destruction. And so it makes us really rethink even our cosmetics, our skincare products. Do we want to kill all the bacteria all the time?
I guess if you want to change it quickly, if you're going to get a fecal transplant and you want to,
Yeah, if you know what's going in is going to be better than what's there.
Yeah.
But that's sometimes tough to predict.
That's true, too. A lot of unvariables here.
It's interesting that that's one of the areas of the Viome project where I learned about something I hadn't heard of before. They called it leaky gum syndrome, right? Instead of leaky gut. Yeah. And that aging, a lot of people get periodontal disease at a certain age, along with all of those other age-related killers. And that the mouth microbiome was one of the things that the Viome people were targeting for better resilience.
Absolutely. And rapamycin, one of its effects is actually making your gums heal and slowing down gum disease, like for elderly people. But it's fascinating. The bacteria in the gums, particularly P. gingivalis, has now been seen in Alzheimer's patients, in the brains of Alzheimer's patients.
That's right.
And in the coronary arteries of people with heart attacks. And so the whole idea of microbiome, it appears we have microbiomes all over our body, even in organs that we previously had been taught were sterile, healthy, but it appears there are these microbiomes, and some people are even suggesting parasites as well, that we're really underestimating them and all. So
I'm sure the microbiomes have their own microbiome.
Yeah. Everything blew up in the 1980s as far as junk food, and our health just started deteriorating. And a lot of people blame seed oils or glucose, but I have one colleague who believes it was the advent of sushi restaurants, which as spreaders of parasites, even subclinical parasites we don't realize, that can go into the liver, go into the brain, and all these other things. Who knows? It's an open question.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, I would say what I thought was really fresh about your approach was the constellation, the way that all of those silos were represented and affecting each other, just by the fact that it was the same audience receiving that information from so many previously separate realms. And I wondered, how has that played out since you guys put on that conference? Did you notice any transformation that you weren't expecting?
Well, my biggest takeaway has been listening really to Rob talking about sugar, and that's probably had the biggest impact on me and my behavior. I'm still working on it.
And conversely, my biggest takeaway was being raised with a dietitian mother and nutrition and everything, was thinking about mindset. And I got that from Steve and from the Mind people.
That's great. Wow.
Great. Well, thanks so much, you guys. It's really been fun talking with you.
And you're both having books released today, right?
That's right. Both of our books released today.
Okay. Well, why don't you take the last minute and tell people how to get a hold of them?
The names of the books are...
My book is Lies I Taught in Medical School, and it's on Amazon or Barnes & Noble or your local library or independent bookstore.
Okay. And Steve?
Mine is The 9 Pillars of Resilience, the proven path to master stress, slow aging, and increase vitality.
Oh, I love the subtext.
It's a step-by-step process that it presents.
Yeah, excellent. Excellent.
All right.
One other thing, any plans for any future gatherings between you two?
Probably.
Yeah? Get these books out first, huh?
It was a great experience, so...
Actually, Steve and I are doing a joint book signing at the local Barnes & Noble here in Los Angeles in a couple of weeks. So.
Oh, yeah, that's great.
We'll be together there.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Happy future now.
And thanks for being there. I really appreciate it. And thanks, Bobby, for listening so well in the background now.
Thank you.
You'll be analyzing what you guys said and reporting on the next show. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.